So, what's it really like being a pastor? What are the inside secrets and stories that you may or may never even be aware of? So, we're joking about this today, but honestly, this episode was inspired by Instagram Reels and Facebook videos, and that I've noticed because Ben's not on social media
I'm
because
not.
he's an old fogey.
No, because I enjoy my life.
Okay, well, I don't have a life, but every once in a while there'll be like some influencer get on and they'll say, these are questions that every other person wants to know about you or what it's like to be a Southerner or a guy or whatever. So this is, what is it like to be a pastor? So what we're going to do is Ben and I are going to pepper each other with questions. Actually, I'm going to pose the questions and kind of give you a little fun insight into what it's like to be a pastor on this episode of Life Talks. So, Ben, you ready?
Yeah, and I just want you to know, as much as you complained about the Thanksgiving episode, this is the one I'm like, oh man, because you're so good at thinking on your feet. Like, remember when we record the videos, Britt knows this. When Britt records you on the video, you're like amazing at it. Yeah. And Britt, am I right? When I do recording, it's kind of like, dude, what's wrong with you? I'm so bad at this. And I've gotten better at it. I have gotten better. But like the first time Britt's like, I'm recording, I'm like, I don't do well with the video camera on me, which is odd because I speak in front of, hundreds of people for a living, but there's something about me speaking singularly to a video camera that I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to say right now? So
I'm loving this even more. This episode is brought to you by Ben being awkward.
But I'm just nervous because you're gonna ask me a question. I feel like there's gonna be things I'm like, I don't know.
Well,
but we're gonna do this, man.
I don't know is an acceptable answer. So, okay.
You sound like me talking to my kids right now.
Yes.
Why'd you do that? I don't know. Well, you better figure it out.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with a fun one.
Oh, fun. I like fun.
Okay.
Yes.
So what is the biggest blooper you have ever pulled in a sermon or a talk or anything that haunts you to this day that you replay at night or whatever? So.
Okay. So I don't think I ever said anything really, obnoxious or dumb. My wife probably remembers this more than anything, but there was a time, the biggest blooper I think was, there was a time where I switched preaching from a Bible and a piece of paper to my iPad. Mm-hmm. And this is like middle of the teens, 2000 teens. And so one Sunday I get up to preach and I cannot get it connected to have any of my notes. Mm. I mean, it's just gone. And I'm up there and like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And I just winged it.
Did you tell him?
Nope.
Nope.
I didn't tell a
soul. See, now that's the sign of the consummate. I did that one time, guest speaking on Easter Sunday. I left my Bible and I was staying like an hour and a half away. I'd driven to it and I get in there and I didn't have my Bible. And I had to preach from memory 3 services. So, yeah, it was.
So anyways, by God's grace, the Holy Spirit help me to remember.
Probably the best sermon you ever preached.
It probably was. People were like, Pastor, you were anointed this morning. I'm like, oh, it's because I didn't have any notes. No, that was the one. That's probably the biggest blooper that I've made.
I've had multiple, and you were there for one of them.
I remember yes booty contest.
Yes. I was giving an illustration talking about a parade, and I was talking about the parade that would go through my hometown.
Yes.
And I would say, and they would pick the most beautiful girl to put on the back of a convertible. She had won the local booty contest.
And I'm telling you,
I was trying to say beauty.
The section of teenagers that morning could not stop shaking.
Yeah. Well, I'm known for unfortunate turns of phrases and inappropriate, just off the cuff comments. Yeah. We've actually got a staff pastor who keeps a journal of them.
Yes, we do, and we will not tell you who it is, but there's a library.
Yes. So, but the morning of the booty pageant was quite, and we were on TV and everything.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
There's nothing, and you just kept going.
Well, what can you do?
Because if you acknowledged it, then it would have been like even worse. But anyways,
okay,
booty contest.
Okay, this is one that's right over the plate and at the knees. What do you like most about being a pastor? What is it that you really like?
The thing I like most about being a pastor is seeing God work in people's lives. When I see God get a hold of someone's heart where they were heading in one direction. They didn't know God, or they were just stuck in sin, and then now they're growing, thriving, walking with Jesus, leading people. To me, there's nothing greater than seeing someone who God transforms, and to know that God, you're just the vessel that He used to help make that process happen, and that's so encouraging.
Yeah.
I just absolutely love it.
Yeah. And there's so many different things about it. I like doing something that I think actually matters. That's
Mm-hmm.
always important to me. Um, but probably for me, it's having been in ministry long enough that now you see guys and ladies that grew up who are now serving the Lord on their own, and the
Mm-hmm.
Lord is using them significantly.
Yeah.
Years ago, I went to the funeral of a guy who mentored me,
Mm.
and as I sat on the platform, I was having a part in the ceremony. All of a sudden, a row of guys, or a line of guys, came in and stood in front of the casket one at a time, and then went up and sat in the choir loft until the whole choir was full. And I leaned over to the guy who was helping me conduct the service. I said, "Who are these guys and why are they coming in?" I wasn't aware this was going to happen. And he said, "These are guys who went into the ministry out of this guy's um, uh, ministry time." He
Wow.
died young. He died in his 50s, I believe, late 50s. And preached. He pastored a tiny church in Ohio that probably didn't have more than 200 people in it, and there was
Wow.
probably 20 or 30 guys that got
Wow.
it. And at that moment, I kind of turned my chair into an altar, and I said, "Lord, if I don't ever accomplish anything in my life, let there be a row of men and women who come up at my funeral and say, 'God used him in some small way
Yeah.
to serve you.'"
Yes, absolutely. That's
So,
it.
okay. What is one of the hardest decisions you've had to make?
Ooh, hardest decisions I've had to make. Probably the hardest one I had to make was probably leaving my old church,
Mhm.
leaving Church of Denver, where I loved that place. I loved the ministry. I loved the people. Our family was very comfortable there. It just felt like if our family. And many people have heard me share this story, but it took me almost a year for me to yield to God and be like, okay, I'll leave. But that was a hard decision. Um, Not only because we loved the people there and we loved the ministry there. You kind of when you plant a church, it's really weird. You almost you feel like that church is like a child of yours
Mhm.
because you saw God birth that out, and so it was really hard. But it was also because we didn't know where God was going to lead us. It was kind of like this unknown. And so that was the hardest decision at any point that I've had to make as far as leaving that church and stepping out into the unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for
And
me.
interesting you chose that because that would have been similar to what I chose. For me, it was leaving our church in Florida to
Hmm.
move here to Charlotte in
Yes.
1999.
Yeah.
It actually took about 9 months from the first contact to the time I actually left. But, 18 years for me there, and for my wife, that's where she had grown up.
Mm.
And those people loved us, and we loved them. I
Yeah.
had started off as an English teacher and became, worked my way through the system, so to speak, to become the lead pastor. These people had been there when we lost our babies, when we got married, when we
Yeah.
had adopted our children, when all these different things happened. And then all of a sudden, we came, we left and came to a completely different culture, a different church where people didn't know us. And, very rapidly after we got here, we also realized they didn't care.
Yeah.
And to be perfectly honest with you, we were more or less a hired hand,
Yeah.
where there we had been family.
Yeah.
And so, during the rough years there, many times I would look back, and it marked a very, very hard period in my own
Yeah.
life and my own journey. And while we were confident we were doing what God wanted us to do, sometimes obeying God is very, very
Absolutely.
hard to do.
Absolutely.
So, okay, a good one. So what is the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you as a pastor?
Oh man, embarrassing thing. Okay, I'll tell probably one of the most. This is one of the things I can remember. Sometimes I can't remember things.
Mhm.
I just maybe it's because I block things out of my mind. I don't if it's bad. I just block it out. But when I did my internship with you in Florida, the summer of 1997, you and I think it was Gary Kolbach came into my office one day, and you're like, "Hey, we've got a little job for you." And I was like, "What?" And you're like, "There's a lady that used to come to this church. No one really knows her, but she died, and we need you to do the funeral because it was July 4th weekend, and everyone was going to be gone." And so I was like, "Okay." So I'm this 21-year-old kid that You gave me the Warren Wiersbe book, Comforting
Mhm.
the Bereaved, and I planned this whole service out. I met with the family, and so I did the service, and it went phenomenal. right? And then so here's the embarrassing part. So everyone thanks me for the time there, and then as I walk out, I leave, and I left my Bible on the top of my car. And so people, when I back out and leave, people are, I mean, they're kind of looking at me like puzzled-eyed, and I'm just like, what's going on now? And then I start driving down the road, right? And this is one of these big, thick King James Bibles. It did not move, but it kind of like the wind flapped it. And so I pulled up at one of the stoplights there, and some guy's like, "Hey, dude, you got something on your car?" And I get out of the car, and then like my Bible's there, and I'm just like, "Oh my gosh!" I drove off from that funeral with the Bible on my car, and they probably just were like, what rent-a-pastor did we get to do this funeral? Anyways, that was
poor seminary student intern.
That's the one that I remember that sticks in my mind. I'm sure there's other embarrassing moments, but that is definitely one of them.
Yeah, I've had so many. There was some of them involve around baptisms. Like there was the time when I was actually helping with baptism. I wasn't doing a baptism, and we had everybody wearing what was like a karate gi. Where you had a belt, and you're supposed to wear like gym shorts underneath it, and then and this guy who, the old farmer, and he probably weighed about 250, and he came in to get baptized, and when the pastor brought him up out of the water, the belt came undone, and he did not understand you were supposed to wear gym shorts underneath, so I got a full frontal flash. As he came up out of the water.
Oh my word.
Had another one where I was helping with a baptism, and a woman was wearing a rather large wig.
I had something like that happen.
Yeah, it came off in the hand.
And she started fighting me because the wig started coming off in the water.
Yes.
And then and she was a little bit more rotund. And so it was kind of like fighting someone to put them under. And I don't think I got her all the way under, but I was not going
Did it count?
I think it counted. I'm not sure, but she was fighting up the storm, and I don't know what the deal was, but
I don't know if you remember this baptism. It was at Northside, and their baptistry was way up. I mean, it was like 3 or 4 floors up.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
was 30 feet up in the sky.
And the choir was underneath it.
Yes.
And I was baptizing, again, a rather well-constructed lady. And when I put her under the water, it just caught at the moment where it created a tsunami effect, and it created a wave that went up and over the glass and down onto the choir below. In this, probably the baptistry was a little too full, and she was there's a lot of water displacement. Let's just put it that way.
Goodness!
And so everybody, below her was shrieking. But to me that was both a Baptist and a Presbyterian baptistry at that moment, because some got immersed and others got sprinkled.
That is hilarious. 3 for the price of 1. Oh, man.
Okay, so, and I have more, but I'm going to stop there. So what is the worst stereotype of being a pastor?
The worst stereotype?
Yeah.
Oh, it's easy. We only work 1 day a week.
It's got to be.
I mean, that's what most people, and I get it. We joke. It doesn't, that used to bother me. It doesn't bother me anymore because I don't, at some point you get to the realization, like, the only person that matters is God, right?
Right.
But that is that typical, oh yeah, you only work 1 day a week. And so that's probably the thing that can be frustrating, that people don't really understand, or they ask these questions like, "What do you do all week?"
Yeah,
and I'm always like, "Well, you can come join me, and I'll show you exactly what I do."
Wear your tennis shoes.
Yeah,
yeah. I actually have a relative who knows that irritates me, and so he brings that up. James, I'm talking about you right now, but he'll bring that up. And so he recently had a little boy, and now he's taught his little boy, like, I wish I had a job like Uncle Dan, so I only have to work once a week.
Just ask a pastor's wife. That's who you should ask.
Oh,
because they
don't want to unleash the Kraken.
They would know. They would be able to explain to you what exactly we do. But anyways, yeah.
I think the other stereotype is that, at some level, all pastors are like televangelists. We're in it for the money, or something along that line. I've always been duly employed. And the reason I've always been duly employed is when I want nice things, I want to be able to say, I bought it with my other income. Thank you very much. Yeah. Pastors don't work on commission. When I'm taking a special offering, I don't get a percent. And in every church I've ever been in, I've been in the top 10% of the givers always, because I lead, and I'm sure you would as well, but we lead by example. We tithe.
Exactly.
But there's just this, it's like the sad thing is when you have somebody who does something horrible, it taints
Yes.
the whole.
Sure.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
like all priests are child molesters or Boy Scout leaders are child molesters,
Yeah.
or all politicians are on the take, and that's not true. You only hear about the the horrible ones. So
Right.
that's and I'm probably super sensitive about it because
Yeah.
I really serve the Lord because I want to and I want to please Him and I feel called to do that. So when somebody implies that, it really
Yeah.
bugs the tar out of me.
Here's another. If 1A is we only work 1 day a week, I think 1B would be that there are some weeks where life is work and the needs of the ministry are so crazy that sometimes our preparation for Sunday doesn't begin until later on. It's not that we're not disciplined. It's just there are certain things, certain weeks that the demands of shepherding people, of leading people, of whatever it might be, and it all of a sudden it's like, well, usually it's by this day my sermon is done, and I haven't because of these five big emergencies crises that happen. And that's probably the other thing is Sunday always comes. Like for example,
Yeah.
Thursday is a national holiday, but guess who's going to be working?
Mhm.
I do, because it doesn't matter what the national. There's always Sunday is coming.
Yeah.
And whether or not the world gets a day off, I don't get a chance to take a day off. I mean, I've got my days off that I take, but I'm just saying, like, if I take Thursday off, I'm working Friday.
Yeah.
If I'm, so it doesn't,
Yeah, the
it
work has to
never,
be done
it never
regardless how
works
many
out
days
to be
you
like,
have.
oh, I've got an extra day off this week. I mean, so that to me is the other thing is sometimes the preparation for a sermon can get disrupted, and that can be a little bit difficult at times.
Yeah, and some people have crises, and in that moment they're in this state of crisis. They don't care. I mean, and it's not because they wouldn't care normally,
Mhm.
but if somebody just got a cancer diagnosis at the last
Right,
minute, or
yeah.
somebody's husband just passed away, which I've had happen,
Right.
you've got to be there. That's our
Yeah,
calling.
that's
At the
right.
same time, in the back of your head, it's, oh my goodness, I've got to get up in a few hours and
Yeah.
deliver a message.
Yes. Yeah.
So and again, we're not saying, oh, what was me?
We're not
I'm just-
complaining at all.
but we're trying to give you a little.
You said
insight into-
misunderstanding, but
Yeah.
they don't understand. Sometimes that's one of the things that people don't understand.
Yeah. So if you could change anything about what you do, what would it be?
Anything that man, that is a really good question. Can I pass?
No. I'll answer while I'm answering. You come up.
All
with
right.
something. Okay.
Yes.
That's not fair.
No, I'm in pass to you to answer first. Let me think about it for a
okay,
while.
okay. Yeah, for me, it's going to be. I would spend more time with people in ministry and less time in administration.
Oh, okay. That's it.
Yeah,
100%.
people do not understand. Our heart's desire is to be with people, to
Yeah.
listen, to
Yeah.
coach, to disciple, to witness, to do all these things. But the necessity, and again, pastoring a small church and pastoring a large church, two completely
Mhm.
different animals. I do not possess the character, skill, talent, intellect, or anything to be the pastor of a small church. and the reason for that, I mean, I grew up in a small church.
Yeah.
My pastor mowed the grass of the
You
church.
do everything.
He took the old ladies to the doctor.
Yeah.
He had coffee with the widowed. He printed the Sunday school material.
Yeah.
He preached 3-4 times a week.
Yeah.
He did all those different
do
things.
everything.
And he had no secretary.
Yeah.
And he had no assistant.
Yeah.
And he also led the youth group and organized that. He locked and unlocked the buildings. I mean, my pastors were saints.
Yeah.
I am not equipped to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so at the same time, I feel responsible, as do you, in our roles. We have to understand budgeting, the law, ethics. We have staff to manage, security features.
Yeah.
Coordinating, calendaring, budgeting. All these different things that have to be done. And people often will say, well, you know what? Sometimes I come to church and it just feels like a business. Well, every family has to have a budget. Every family has to have security.
Yeah.
We are a family.
Yeah.
It's just a huge family. When you got literally over 1,000 people who need you to be doing what, I mean, people don't understand that for a typical Sunday service, we need over 100 volunteers in place, ready to go.
Mhm.
To make that happen.
Yeah.
And that's quite a coordinating thing.
Yeah.
And so is our heart to be with people? Would I like to go out to dinner with everybody who wants to go out to dinner with me? I would love that. I'd love to go to people's houses. I would love to do those things.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's just no way because, again, we
Yeah.
have families too.
Totally. I would say, man, if I could spend all week with just discipling people and studying to preach on Sunday, to teach God's word, that would be the most amazing job. But I mean, like you said, there's a reality to the administrative leadership of the church, which is not what I'm not passionate about it, but it's when I say passion, it needs to be done, and I don't want to ignore it. But it's definitely not in the thing that I wake up every day thinking, oh, I can't wait to have these meetings and do this. It's the things that really drive me are discipleship and teaching God's word. Those are things that get me excited the most.
Right. Last one for you. Biggest God moment.
Biggest God moment. Oh man. Okay. I'll never forget this Sunday. I got up to. This has only happened one time in my life. I had this entire sermon prepared, and the Holy Spirit, while I was sitting there in the seat, said, I don't want you to preach that sermon. I want you to preach on this passage. And I had not studied that passage. I hadn't done anything. So I was just like, God, I don't know what you want me to do. He's like, preach this passage. I got up there. I didn't have any notes, didn't have anything. I just preached the sermon that God told me to preach. And from what anyone has ever told me, it's the greatest sermon that I've ever preached. And they didn't record it.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that amazing? My brother to this day is like, Ben, it's one of the best sermons I've ever heard in my entire life.
And they didn't record
And they didn't record it, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But it was like this moment that God was like, I want you to go to Isaiah 40 and preach this sermon. And I did. And it was just like this anointed moment that I had with God. And for some reason, God did not want it recorded.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is. And those kind of moments are affirmations from the Lord.
Yeah. I would love for that to happen like every week. Wouldn't it be great? Like, all right, God, I'm just waiting. But I mean, you can't duplicate that, and you can't it's like going into Narnia. The God when Aslan calls you, you go. But that was a massive God moment I'll never forget as long as I live.
Yeah, those moments where God intervenes. Just the one I was thinking of didn't happen in a pulpit, but it was at a time when I really felt like God had me on the shelf, and I wondered whether or not He wanted me to be a ministry pastor or whatever. And I was supposed to preach the next morning here at Life Fellowship, and I got sick Saturday evening, and I don't get sick. And when I get sick, I can barrel through. I'm just ornery. And but this was one of those where my throat was closing up. I had a fever. It was diverticulitis.
Oh yeah,
That's what specifically it was, where literally I could have been laying in bed writhing in pain. But all this happened, and I went to bed and I said, Lord, I am not going to be able to preach tomorrow, and there's nobody else to preach. I don't know what to do. And about 3:00 in the morning, I woke up, and the sheets were so wet. The blanket was wet. The sheets were wet. The mattress cover was wet. It was so, and I woke up my wife and I said, I don't know what's going on. I've never had anything. I was like somebody wet the bed. It was that weird. She literally got bath towels and laid them on the bed and soaked up the water. We stripped the bed, had to soak up the mattress, and I had no more symptoms at all.
Wow.
I've never had anything experience that. If somebody else told me that, I'd say, yeah, well, whatever. But for it to happen to me, and it was like God saying, got your back, man.
Yeah.
Got your back.
That's so
you go
cool.
preach.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, those have been some fun stories.
Cool.
We actually had a bunch more questions we could have done, but we didn't
We'll do another episode.
We'll have to do another episode. As always, we're honored that you would join us on Life Talks. Thank you so much for doing so. Please share the word on your social media accounts if you would. And until next time, thanks for joining us here at Life Talks.